Hello, Ian here. Welcome back to Darkstorm Minis, and the first thing I've got to do is show you what I've been up to. So as you can see, we've put some miniatures together. We've also got them painted black and based as well. Most of these are out of the patrol box, but I threw a Malanthrope in there just to spice things up. Now, before settling on the colour scheme that I showed you yesterday, I did trial some others prior, and it wasn't until the fourth attempt that I found the colour scheme that I finally settled on. So here are just some other colour schemes that I did settle on. Okay, red body, nice grey scales, slightly different colour on the carapace. Have a little look at a flesh tone with some blue. I also looked at a more earthy camouflage type of look, and even had a little play with magnetising. Once I actually settled on the green colour scheme, I completed a model so I knew what it was going to look like with bioweapons on board. Quite pleased with the final result. Went for a very, very shiny carapace, but quite pleased with the result there. But what we need to do is now to show you how to get from here. We're going to continue with the Tyranid that we started yesterday. And step by step, we're going to work our way to something hopefully looking like that. Let's go. So wow, it really feels like we're starting the journey now. Finally getting some colour on some miniatures. Now to the really good bit where we start to see the army on the table. I'm going to start painting some gribblies. I'm going to start painting some of the bigger stuff. But first of all, let's finish the guy we've started. I'll go through the scales on the back and show you how I'm doing those. I'll go through the skin next, and we'll also do the bioweapons. So here's our little mate from yesterday, ready to go. Paints are already mixed in the palette. Going to be using exactly the same brush as we did yesterday. Give it a little clean and dry it off on a piece of kitchen roll, and we'll work on the armour carapace. We'll work on the upper body to start with, extending out onto the arms but not reaching the bioweapon, and take it step by step and just cover that area, and then we'll move on to a new area. So first things first, black mixed with a little bit of green. And we will just start as we did before. Three quarters, 2/3 of the plate-ish, covered in green. Trying to go with the flow of the plates as we talked about in one of the other sessions. Okay, and now I'm going to do that all the way around the body. Virtually going to leave no areas of shadow, apart from the areas I don't touch. So upper surface get a full layer of paint, and then the actual plates themselves are around about 2/3, like I said, to 3/4 covered in the green, and I'm just going to work my way around the body doing that. I'll just show you a little bit of the skin to show you there's nothing really exciting or different going on there either. So that's that done. And we'll come on to the chest. Bit of green, a little bit of black again. Okay, onto the chest. So mix those in. And again, not really diluting the paint a great deal here. I'm going to save those techniques for another day. Here we're just going to paint on neat. And we're going to go for some nice bold colours. And try and get some nice clean coverage and do some partial wet blending as we go. Wet blending in the sense that the paint will still not have had a chance to cure, and so in essence will be wet and will take up into the paint above it in the next layer. Now the sternum, I'm sort of leaving the lower portion a bit darker, touching the edges, and I think you can get the gist of what I'm doing here. I'm literally just painting everything apart from the deeper recesses. As you can see, I'm leaving between the ribs clear and just touching on the bones themselves. I'll work my way around the rest of the model and on to the next colour. So we've now covered the chest and the carapace on the back arm all the way to the point of where the tail starts. I've covered his arms as well, all in a dark green, and it's such a dark green that it is hard to see what's going on, but it sets the tone of the colours to come and is worthwhile putting on as a layer underneath. Like I said, all of those scales are only 3/4 covered, with any recesses that meet another scale staying black. So what we're going to do next is actually not move on to the next colour. They do have these little pieces on their arms where there's like fluid or radiation ports, or I'm not really sure what they're meant to be, but those, if we take a look at the other model, I decided to make a little bit more vibrant and stand out and maybe look like there's some energy behind them, or fluid pulsing under there. So we changed the colour of those to a bit more of a vibrant colour, and how I did that was to first start with some ivory. Now this layer is the layer that you have to be very careful with. And so what we're going to do is just very carefully remove some of the paint on my finger first, and then just strike very carefully onto the groove and just start to go around. Now it's at this point where if we do overrun, we can correct. So we can pick the colour back up. If we overrun, we can just touch around the edge with our dark green and hide any errors that we caused. So I'm now going to go around the rest of the model and put white everywhere, and I'll be back in seconds. So a little bit awkward to see, but that's them just touched, so you can see the little black lines between them. They're a little bit untidy if I'm honest, but I'll touch those up as we go. The next thing to do is to actually get the luminescent colour on. So I've prepared some luminescent green. This is Vallejo's luminescent green. Just 1 second. Oh. There we go. Oh, sorry, fluorescent green. And it's an absolute nightmare to mix. But once you get it mixed, it's a nice colour. So what we'll do now is just, again, very, very carefully, we will just dab onto those little pieces of white. And we'll work our way around the model and just make that all green. It'll probably take maybe 2 layers to start to get a popping colour from it, but it's worth it once you actually got it on. So I'll go around the model, we'll do that, and then on to the next step. So the next step, following getting those to glow a little bit, is to actually move back onto the plates and the armour, and then set where we think all the highlights and the high areas are going to be, and get some of the colour very similar to how we did on the top of the head there. And again, the plates will start first. I've already pre-mixed a little bit of the dark green mixed with the lime green. So I'll just probably introduce that to about 50% of the plate. There we go. And there's a little bit of a high area up there. Just introduce it there, and then just gently stroke it down the plate. And bearing in mind what we said on the last video, that because we've got a creature race, we need to add a little bit of variation creature to creature, because that's just how things work in nature, or in the warp. Goodness me, the amount of chaos in the warp, definitely not going to be anything looking the same out there. So as we come over the top, give it a little bit, push a little bit more colour onto the top, go back onto the edges, and then we'll re-colour the area we've just been a little bit further away. And if you notice, I've been much bolder with the colour on top, and we'll get a little bit of the dark green, pick that up, and we'll just touch it into the edge, just so there is a bit more of a blend rather than a sharp contrast in the colour, make it look a little bit more subtle. Okay, so that's that border. We'll then go to the lime green, and then again, higher placement, and I think we'll just have a little bit of a pattern over here appearing, and I'll blend that in a moment. And then up onto the higher areas, and because the paints are wet, they will blend and saturate together. And then we'll go back to our previous tone, bit of darker colour mixed in there, and then just blend that edge in again. Okay, and this works with any colour scheme really. It's about blending the colours in and making them try and look like a natural transition. And what I'm doing here is I'm just giving a little bit of irregularity to the colour scheme and to the pattern, because like I said, these are creatures and they just won't look all the same, and it's nice to have a little bit of irregularity in there. In fact, this is maybe a little bit of an advantage over things like Space Marines, where it's actually expected that they are going to look all the same, and so you're committed to that familiarity of pattern. It lets us get away with a little bit more. I'm just going to touch up into that little recess there where there is a little bit of a proud spine, and I'm not actually doing a complete line, I'm doing like a dotted line down there, so that actually, I'll just get the camera to refocus, so that it just shows where the surface plate is. And then what I'm going to do, go to our yellow green, again this is a Vallejo yellow, and catch the edges and maybe miss the odd area as well, deliberately, to exaggerate that irregularness to the plates. You can see it's starting to come together now, starting to blend in with the carapace on the head. And then the final touch is going to be on the edges, on the edges where the highlights we want those to show. Okay, now all I've got to do is reproduce that across the rest of these plates. Skin wise, I'll move on to the chest, and it's going to be a very, very similar process, but I will show you just so we've done some skin as well. Or exoskeleton, as I think it is in Tyranids. Okay, so we've already done the dark green with black. So now we're going to do the dark green on its own. And while it's wet, the dark green does show up quite nicely, but trust me, this thing is going to go off and go a lot darker. Now, an interesting area is the sternum. I don't know, can we see into the sternum there? So there are little ridges on there. I'm just going to clean a bit of paint off my brush. There are little ridges in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just catch down the side of the rib, or sternum, sorry. Get inside the model as well, go all the way down the edge, all the way down the bottom, and now I'm going to put a bit more colour at the top end, but leaving the very centre of it quite dark. Okay, so I'm just going to do these top couple of ribs and the sternum just to give you a sense of how the rest of it's done, and then I'll crack on with the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is anywhere where it goes a little bit deeper, now I've moved on to the mixture of lime green and dark green, I'm actually going to start to touch less of the rib. So just a bit more highlighting now. So this corner angle here, coming down onto the rib, and then bit of the midsection, bit of the end, corner of the rib, midsection, end. And that's going to be how that transitions for all of them. Where the sternum meets the clavicle at the top here, I am just going to put a little dot of colour on the top corner there, as it's a high area. And then the sternum, we're going to just touch the very top edge, and then little stripes trying to follow the natural contours on the rib. It's actually hard to get in here and show you at the same time. Top border, little stripes onto the rib, make sure you're catching the edge. Opposite side, just gently all the way down the rib cage. Okay, add a little bit more colour to the top, same colour, not changed colour yet. Okay, so we're using the mixture of dark green and lime green, and we're just going to just touch again the edges, reinforce the colour, and it's hard to get my brush in here and show you and see what I'm doing at the same time. And then the lower down we go, the less colour we apply. Right, on to the next colour. Ooh, let's just do a bit more of the mixture of the lime green and the dark green on the model, on the ribs. Again, touching the same areas as before, corner angle, and each time you're touching a little bit less of the model and trying to bring those highlights through. So now we'll go to the lime green all on its own, And each time I'm getting in the paint, the brush is wet, and then I'm stroking backwards and pulling the brush through on the palette so that it actually does form a point still. Okay, so even less of an area is going to get covered this time. Get a bit more paint on, we'll wipe it all off again and then start again. It's just a very careful process. Now normally, if you're doing more significant areas of the model, what you'll find is that the paint is actually a bit drier than this. Now what I'm in danger of doing here, because I'm painting such a small area at a time, is that I'm going to lift the not very dry coat of paint off the model. So this isn't ideal really, because we're not giving it the amount of time it needs. Normally if you've worked your way around sort of the whole of the chest, by the time you get back to the beginning piece, then you are talking about a bit more maturity in the paint, and it's much more comfortable to work with. But what I'll do is, once I've done this bit for you guys who've seen what we're doing, is I'm going to work my way around larger sections. And despite the fact that we are sort of letting it dry, it's a combination of wet enough that it blends together, but dry enough that it doesn't have these little where it goes chalky and dry and you end up pulling the paint off, is what I'm trying to say. And you will see on some miniatures when people have painted too early that they get this chalky residue building up on the model, and the idea is that really your paint should, unless you're deliberately doing it, it should be a nice smooth finish that you're trying to achieve on your miniature. And chalkiness is either the paint's too dry or you've just been impatient. I'm going to put those little lines in across the rib again, making sure I catch the edges. Let's go down a little bit. Okay, all the way down the rib. Okay, so that's caught those. I think you can see what I'm up to, and now we're going to go to the brighter green yellow and just tap a little bit of colour onto those higher areas, and you can see how exactly. Now what we're trying to do, try and get the ribs in a line, so that highlight that you're putting on is going to look like a line going down the chest once we get it all completed. Now we're not going to go very far down the ribs this time. We want those high bright spots at the top. Maybe, and then cut across in those lines. And I think that's probably as far as down as we need to go. That'll give us some natural shadow in the recess there. And then just on the upper areas, let's bring in a bit of the ivory again. And this is going to be really fine work. Just on the upper aspects. There we go. Okay. And as I said earlier, this works for any colour scheme. And if I just pause and go grab my other miniatures, you'll see I've used a very similar style in all of those. So I've quickly grabbed the other models that I painted, and again you can see that it is the ribs, the corner border, straight line, mid-rib, straight line, border, straight line, and it gives that 3D effect by placing the light in straight lines, and just makes it look like a real rib cage there. And again you can see how on the sternum I've stuck to the border, less shading as we go down, and kept the highlights towards the top. If you're into more of a flesh tony colour, again we've done exactly the same here. What I did here was I did put some blood in between the ribs and give it a bit more of a visceral feel, but that exactly the same technique, just with browns coming through to flesh tones and then a little bit of ivory in there just to highlight. And then red, surprisingly exactly the same, and it is just dark reds coming through to reds, and highlighting with a tiny bit of ivory in with the red. You could use orange, it depends what look you're going for here, but I thought that was quite a nice colour scheme. And then it's messing around with the contrast colours. Now the one thing I haven't been able to show you on those 3 miniatures is what the bio weapons are, because in your head when you're doing the painting, what you need to do is think about your bio weapon and your complementary colours. So I've gone for joints, sacks, poison sacks, the little accessory points on the weapons. I decided to go for a very sticky blood red feel, as though there's some sort of visceral secretion there. And then for the ornamentation on the guns where there's energy cells, I've gone for a different look, which blends in more with the weapon. And then anything that's bone, I have actually gone for a bone colour. I don't want too much green on the model. I needed some sort of contrast, and so that provides that for me. So with the red and the white for the bone weapons, really nice accent colours. And then I decided to go for the really shiny glossy carapace, that aliens look, and I think it achieves quite a nice look. And then spent a little bit of time on the basing, bit of terrain on there, bit of ferns. He's meant to be in a jungle, so he can now skitter off back into the jungle, and we will crack on with the video. I'll get on with painting the rest of the body. We'll come back when that's done. Okay, so painting of the body, exoskeleton and the carapace is complete. This is our destination, and so far we are here. So the next things to do are the bone swords and the bio weapon, and the finishing off things like hooves and the base. Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground. Got some great basic techniques there. Happy with the results it's getting us. Really pleased with the overall look of the miniature. Happy that it's reproducible, and I'm hoping it's inspiring you guys to get out there and design your own. Now in the next video, what we'll do is we'll cover the bioweapons, we'll cover the bone swords, and we'll cover the basing. But that only leaves us one thing left to say. And what do we say here on Darkstorm Rising? Are we painting minis yet? Hell yeah! Catch you soon.